कृष्णा ओके ना?
मैम क्या है वीडियो ऑन చేయలేదు मैम.
गुड मॉर्निंग. Give me a moment, please. Audible? Am I audible to everybody? Yeah, thank you so much. And I was overwhelmed by several of the messages from the students who were writing the main exam. Krishna, ఇది స్క్రీన్ ఓకేనా?
ఓకే మ్యామ్.
డిస్ప్లే నేను ఒక్కసారి నాకు కాల్ చేయరా ప్లీజ్? Extremely sorry for the delay. Some technical thing here. So let us begin to talk. Basically, several of you might have gone through yesterday's evening paper, paper 2, and I'm sure you must have got uh, really excited to see the paper, most of the questions being direct questions and all. And based on various remarks that I was getting, एक तो वो common remark तो होता ही है where students say that class में जो हमने पढ़ाया था या फिर whatever questions they might have attempted, it's like the replica of what we have been doing. That gives me the kind of kick that is required to keep working. Second thing is that कईयों ने, not one or two people, several of you have messaged saying that this is also something that is common I find on a regular basis. That ऐसे लग रहा था कि क्लास का ही टेस्ट लिख रहे kind of. That is one common comment that I found, and I'm very delighted to hear this, because at the end of the day in the examination, when you are attempting to write, that's when the test of entire preparation, entire content that you have studied, and the methodology, all that comes to the testing. Now, on those with those comments, let me begin. Um, See, the major distinction that you could find between paper 1 and paper 2 is that paper 1, reading between the lines was very much there, as I was saying in the paper 1 discussion. Paper 2 examiner looks to be very, very generous towards the student. Even in the context of tribal anthropology, not much of trickiness that was found. Basic reading was sufficient. Only thing was that you should have been practicing to write the questions. I mean, that was the major thing. Now, on that note, let me begin because any paper discussion of UPSC generally takes about, say, a couple of hours. And those of you who were absent for the live, I'm sure you must have completed that, during the last night and during the day today. So let us begin. Something that is very commonly to be understood from this paper is that examiner was trying to see the contemporary orientation with which you are preparing. And the standard kind of things, जैसा हमने क्लास में बताया था बहुत बार कि if there is no other side, Sohan will be there, kind of. And simple kind of understandings. Couple of thinkers. So the trend of asking two or more thinkers in the same question, that also seems to have. There is a lot of scope in this paper to draw tables, to draw maps, and good lot of fieldwork based studies. So the joyous kind of writing, as much as possible, you could actually see in this particular paper. With that, once again, sir, I'm extremely sorry for the delay. Some technical issue there. I'm sure you wouldn't mind. So पहला question ही था Sohan cultural tradition. What I thought was that it would be much, जिस तरह से हमने एक आध बच्चों से बात की इसके बारे में, it would be much better if you split this answer into what are the opportunities Sohan provided to us and what are the, if I may say, challenges that Sohan had provided. I think it is from that can be a better way of answering the question rather than simply saying that see these are the phases of Sohan and then describing the Sohan. बहुत सारे बच्चों ने ये चीज़ की कि the 4 different phases of Sohan they try to discuss and all, but मुझे ये लगा कि if this is a 10 marker, instead of focusing on describing the 4 major phases of Sohan, it would be better to address this as what are the opportunities and challenges Sohan tradition had provided to Indian archaeology. ये ज़्यादा मुझे बेहतर लगा. In terms of opportunities, you may say that Sohan provided us with that continuity of cultural tradition from the lower Paleolithic to middle and upper Paleolithic, etc. So that continuity with the proper evidences of the tool, I mean that gives a major opportunity for us, and we also see that this has provided us with forward and backward linkages, and there is also the whole lot of Shivalik and the River Valley region that provided us with depositional kind of studies. So when we are saying this, see, uh, as a conventional writer, student may think that okay, मुझे तो phases ही बताने हैं. Why am I supposed to? So if that is the kind of a mindset you are having, phases you can brief it up. You can divide this answer into 50-50%, and because even if you are writing the phases of Sohan, major challenges that it had given to us in terms of the tectonic activity there, and then depositional and erosional features Sohan has offered to us, this anyway has to be incorporated. So the challenges that it had offered in terms of the ambiguity in in chronology, and how exactly one can distinguish between Eolithic and Clactonian kind of a tool typologies, etc. I think that can be. And as Bhattacharya looks at this particular region, the major absence of hand axe culture, that also because hand axe seem to be the core area of Paleolithic, especially the lower and middle Paleolithic. So that the typical lower Paleolithic hand axe tradition, when it goes absent, that becomes a major challenge. And perhaps when perhaps when you are trying to incorporate different phases of Sohan, one table form may be sufficient. You need not actually have to go in for the detailing of description there. Perhaps you may also incorporate certain sites as another column. This alone can give the entire description. But anthropologically speaking, this region gives us that strong identity of a cultural trajectory that emerges in this part of the world. So, yeah. And you may perhaps also link it up with how exactly we had resolved the challenge of having the depositional and erosional features and the tectonic activity. So you may perhaps link it up with the Somme Valley tradition of France and how we try to resolve the issue of the Sohan. I think it is from that point of view. In fact, Sohan, though, that's that kind of a question. You can even get it for 20 markers. So uh, it's a largely emotional kind of a question for that matter. We have the other question here, the triangular discussion. Coming to caste dominance, factionalism, and political power. You can see a continuity there, in fact. And you have different thinkers that come into this particular question. In the caste dominance or the dominant caste, you have M.N. Srinivas. You have factions. If you at all you were studying dominant caste and the critical appraisal of dominant caste, there are different opinions that were put forth. It is not the entire caste that was dominant, but it was a few factions or few lineages, few individuals kind of. So this is a triangular thing, and then the sequential element also. A caste dominance may bring in or strengthen factionalism, and that may make inroads into political authority and political power. So basically, your answer here is a combination and intersection between the three: the cycle of reinforcement of the leadership, the political power, and caste dominance. And so, in this triangular entity, what you should be incorporating is the contemporary dynamics. How yeah, that's right. Dubé's argument. The contemporary element of secular aspects strengthening the dominance. So within the secular, you get the political power, and that is where you see the new emergence of new dominant caste because of the single most powerful element, that is political power, electorate, and the democracy coupled with the elements of reservation, etc. So this basically is the flow of things, how exactly the factions and dominance, etc. And as a few of you were submitting your answers yesterday, I could see students giving examples from UP, Bihar, and several other places from where you see the modern political system, like different political parties coming up with the strength of the factions and strength of the political power trying to yield. So otherwise they may not be the purer ones, Sanskritic ones, but then though they are middle caste, irrespective of religion again, though they are middle caste, they were able to exert the dominance because of the political power. So I think that is where it is. And one other question. This is a very interesting one, regionalism and naming specific politicians can be a problem, but in the studies people have been doing, in proper paper presentations, we see the names being used. In your case, you may perhaps incorporate the party names. Party names is fine, rather than specific individuals. And yeah, regionalism. When we talk about regionalism, you may perhaps give a basic a definition of regionalism, how it is a political expression based on the sub-regional ethnic identities. Now, the focus here of this answer has to be different forms of regionalism that led to a fight for autonomy. That may be linguistic regionalism, like how we have linguistic states that were formed, or developmental based regionalism when there is a conflict. Regionalism and autonomy. Here you are looking at it from a different perspective. What a student is saying is, can we say that more accessibility to transportation and distant workplaces led to increased regionalism, that is, people in far off places looking for a commonality in terms of region? Yeah, backward working wise, you may say so. But here it is not simply, the question is not simply regionalism, it also comes with an assertion for autonomy. It is from that point of view, I think whatever you are mentioning is slightly tangential to the requirement of this particular question. So what I think is, for this, one could be developmental regionalism, it could be linguistic regionalism, it can also be seen as ethnic regionalism, like how developmental councils, district councils, autonomous district councils are established in the Northeast. So, and maybe cultural regionalism, as you are talking about religion-based regionalism, can also be a part of it. On the name of, on the basis of religion, the affinities could be, and then you are trying to fight out for. Westernization, increasing regional, in particular cases you can. Because there can be certain, not only westernization, but contact with the mainstream. For example, Jharkhand is there, or Greater Nagalim is there. When contacts with the outsider, contacts with the mainstream has been strengthening the fight for autonomy, yes, to that extent. So your answer should also be incorporating whether there is a positive tendency in this or negative. That also becomes a vital element here. When we talk about regionalism, whether there is any positive dimension and what are the major challenges. Because when we are talking about challenges, the whole lot of secessionist movements, regional autonomy based movements, that become a major threat for the union's existence. So in that sense, we see that there is a negative element. But you see, in any such kind of a question, yesterday also I was making a mention of this when I was discussing paper one. I was saying that in most of the questions, how far it is relevant, or how an anthropology can play a role in that particular context, that becomes an essential thing. So here in this particular question, regionalism and autonomy, how anthropologist's perspective has to be, this should be incorporated, and these kind of concepts, contexts, they throw new challenges to the anthropologists, because that is where there is this issue of whether one can support the people on the ground, or one should be supporting the one at the higher ups in the society. So whether you're siding with the government, or you are siding with the people who are involved in. So this is a major challenge, basically. I hope it is clear. You can very much incorporate autonomy of tribes. So that I was talking in terms of ethnic regionalism, ethnic regionalism. So it can be diverse kind of things, you know. And I hope I can go to the next one. If at all you see examiner trying to slightly trouble you. In fact, yes, NEFA, philosophy of NEFA, involvement of tribal Panchashil. Yes, that form. Basically, when you're full-fledged studying about Warrior Elvin, you would be studying, or any particular author for that matter, you would be studying about their literature, their methodology of research, and if at all they were involved in any kind of policy making, etc. So it is from that point of view, a direct question here is linking the tribes of Arunachal and how exactly his approach had been. So one would be the theoretical approach, fieldwork tradition, and administrative approach of Elvin, whether he was recommending a complete isolation or assimilation or integration. That is where the tribal Panchashil actually comes into picture. And his approach towards northeast frontier area and the books that he had written on the northeast Nefa region, where he was actually talking about, describing them as maybe the noble savages, children of the nature, etc. So, but it is not simply that. What generally goes missing in the scripts of the student is the critical appraisal. As in, in the case of, one second. కృష్ణ అది బ్లింక్ అవుతుంది నాన్న లేకపోతే నేను ల్యాప్టాప్ పెట్టుకొని చేస్తారా నాకు తెలియదు కదా కృష్ణ టెక్నికల్ సడన్ గా షట్ డౌన్ అయితే అప్పుడు పెడతాం చలో These are very common and direct kind of questions, that is little and great tradition. The one that is incorporated in your question is communication. It's not simply characteristics, but communication. When I say communication, you are largely to talk about interconnection between them through universalization and parochialization. I think that forms the major thing. It is but as a convention, generally what we recommend to the student is you also try to incorporate the critical appraisal, at least a small paragraph could be added to it. How exactly great and little tradition kind of a concept can be of relevance in the contemporary times in understanding Indian society and social change. This is it. I mean, out of all the questions that are there in paper 2 this year, this is the one that blows the student away with the description. In fact, largely you are to talk about the major great apes and largely the primates in terms of the monkeys. So anthropoids rather. But when he's trying to describe, then the student might slightly get shaken. Significance of symbolics in India, that's a general question students would study. But he is trying to describe significance of symbolics of India, giving its subdivisions and fossil primate fauna and major primate fossil localities. So that becomes a slightly trickier one with many facts that have to be incorporated in your answer. So you would perhaps begin with overall comment of Sivaliks, how it has been instrumental in establishing India's position in the human evolution, as well as how the tool typologies could actually be established. Having said that, you should be going with, see, the first one we see is significance of Shivaliks, and it's a subdivision. So the beauty of this question is he is describing your answer. In the paper one also several questions we have seen where structuring becomes easy. Structuring becomes easy because the question itself is describing. So subdivisions, whether you call lower Shivaliks, middle Shivaliks and upper Shivaliks, in each of those Shivalik layers, what is the timeline and what are the major fossil evidences that are found, either it is Sivapithecus or any other kind of Sohanian tradition, cultural remains, etc. So this becomes one major part. Second thing that he is asking is the fossil evidences of the major primates and fauna. We can actually combine the two, or you can actually divide it into what are the hominoids that are found and other primates. In the hominoids, anyway, you would write Sivapithecus, Gigantopithecus, Ramapithecus, and to certain extent the questionable Dryopithecus evidence. This becomes one. The second one is the other primates. It could be different varieties of monkeys, macaques that are found in that particular region. So that establishes a beautiful setting of hominoid and other kind of fauna. This is one. And yeah, the last one is what are the localities? Localities in the sense that you have majorly the 4 or 5 major regions that are part of Shivaliks that by default have to be incorporated in your answer. So beginning from the Potwar region to sites in Himachal, sites in Uttar Pradesh, etc. I think, yeah, the beautiful thing here is it is very well laid out, and you can perhaps conclude with the how paleoanthropological evidences of Sivalik have saved the face of Indian archaeology by preserving um, the early human evolutionary line. So the major challenge that we are facing now is connecting these evidence of Ramapithecus, Sivapithecus with the human evolutionary line. So the gap between the hominins and these earliest hominoids, I think that with that you can conclude your answer. In fact, when you were preparing for this year, I was mentioning this. What are the major human fossil evidences that India has produced? On that, we were trying to prepare. We were trying to answer questions. So this is in a different way of asking the same content. You have the other question here, major features of a Sarkar's classification. Was this classification better than Risley, and explain? Have you noticed? Questions on all probable predictable lines, but teasing you because he is asking, was his classification better? Don't take the questions on the face of them. The idea is that you should be bringing in the problems in the comparison. Um, so the first part, delineate the major features of Sarkar. So as you all must be knowing, Sarkar was considering cranial capacity, cranial characteristics as the major criteria, and others he tried to add up. But he gave most importance to the cranial features. And then based on that, whatever 6 major criteria, racial types that he had given, like negritos, proto-Australoids, Mongoloids, Western brachycephals, etc., on them you will have to give a description, because that's what is the question about. Delineate the major features. So what is the major racial criteria that he was using, and based on those racial criteria, what are the racial types? Having said this, the second part is comparison with Risley. Now, in this comparison, you may perhaps give a small table, or you may describe, because Risley's classification was largely based on a smaller group, with the absence of some of the racial types that became questionable, objectionable, or debatable kind of things. Things like Negrito, or even Proto-Australoid, etc. Now, we will have to see where there is the higher depth in terms of quality and quantity of research. So, based on those lines, Sarkar seems to have done much more detailed work. Nevertheless, I do not want you to take a stand on, see, this one was better and that. Instead of taking a clear cut stand, I think it would be more reasonable to give a comparative account. There are drawbacks, or the limitations that Risley's classification had brought to us. But you try not to be brutal in that criticism, because he was the earliest one in giving anthropometry based work to us. So you don't try to judge him on those lines. But what I want you to do is, as I always say this in the class, in the conclusion, irrespective of whether it is Sarkar or Risley, we will have to go by this conclusion. That is, that is the current nature, the current opinion of biological anthropology, namely, we are now not supporting any such kind of racial classification. Now, you may conclude on that by saying race, how exactly it is a myth. And these kind of classifications seem to be obsolete in the contemporary times. I think with on those lines you can perhaps conclude. All of you are okay? You're okay? Some technical glitches, I'm extremely sorry for that, but otherwise, I don't think there should be a problem with the explanation related things. The impact of Christianity on the northeastern tribal societies of India. That was the question, pretty much a direct kind of a one. So basically here, when we are talking about impact, you can talk about different waves of arrival of Christianity into the Northeast. That may form one small discussion. Different genres of churches that have emerged. In the opening paragraph itself, you can bring in Heimendorff's opinion on Christianity or in the Northeast. And a small table can be incorporated. You may, Hutton's ethnograph can be. You may give a small table showing the extent of Christianization, because map-wise, I'm not sure whether you can incorporate, but a small table can be showing which state has what is the percentage of Christianization there. And you can elaborate on different kinds of impacts with case studies, like cultural impact is there. When we are talking about cultural impact, things like headhunting practices that have drastically reduced because of Christianization. So, replacement of certain very traditional aspects, like maybe the tattooing, rites of passage, brutal, violent rites of passage that were replaced by much more much more non-violent kind of things. And something that is unforgettable and should and must be incorporated in such a question is impact on the education. So we see that northeastern region has experienced that. And because this is a Northeastern Christianity related question, Debhar Commission is mandatory here. Their comment on the services of the missions in that area. And thirdly, you may incorporate the social change, social impact in terms of their habits, lifestyle habits, alcoholism, and kind of things, and how exactly their marriage rules, family systems have changed, what kind of types and forms of marriage that came to be established, and of course economic and political impact is also one, as S. C. Roy mentions about the Baptist Church, that they try to bring awareness of the political rights of the people, and hence polarization on the political lines is also something that seems to be taken up seriously. ऐसा है. And because Christianization is the question, LP Vidyarthi has to be. Negative comments also have to be incorporated. How he viewed Christianization as a mechanism of acculturation of the tribes and vertically dividing the tribal villages into Christian and non-Christian kind of versions. ऐसा है. And yeah, the conclusion, you may use Hemmendorf alone, how revolutionized Northeast had been because of the impact of Christianity. And you have the other question, very simple and direct one. Describe the characteristic features and distribution of Upper Paleolithic culture. Now, distinctive features and distribution, I expect you to incorporate the challenges Upper Paleolithic had provided to India. With that, you must begin your answer. When compared to other parts of the world, how it was difficult to clearly delineate Upper Paleolithic and what are the reasons for it. Having said that, the services of people like H.T. Sankalia, Dieter and Patterson in clearly laying out a three-layered classification of Paleolithic culture, with Upper Paleolithic having certain distinctive characteristics. So that is where you would perhaps bring in the tool typologies and technologies like blade and burin culture. And here in this particular phase, that is Upper Paleolithic, carrying forth the Upper Paleolithic character of Europe, you may incorporate art form culture. Mesolithic would have been a major challenge, but as far as the Upper Paleolithic is concerned, you can stick to the generalized format that we find in the European archaeology. And the distribution kind of a word that is used in your question, for distribution, we will have to give the regionalization, like how generally we give Central Indian sites such as Bhimbetka and Western sites like Didwana, Bagor is there, or South Indian sites, the whole lot of South Indian sites. And even in the case of Maharashtra, you have sites like Nevasa. Northwestern region also you can incorporate. So I think, yeah. Map becomes mandatory in this question. On the map itself, you may give the sites, and in the legend, you can incorporate the major features that we find in terms of art form culture, in terms of tool typologies, kind of. So because it is the Upper Paleolithic, you may link it with the Mesolithic and stuff. Generally, that's what we do, right? the challenge of Mesolithic, especially in the context of India. In the case of general world Mesolithic, we have the sudden disappearance of art form culture and different kind of tool typology coming up. In the case of India, we see that such kind of a sudden disappearance doesn't happen. So on that, you can close your answer. Then environmental and biocultural factors influencing health of tribes of India. Environmental and biocultural factors. So you can divide them into the two as the examiner had given. Environmental based on the habitat, ecology and habitat, the whole lot of iodine deficiency disorders, and the combination that has been happening, that is culture contact coupled with the environmental damage leading to challenges. So waterborne diseases is a major thing. In fact, people tried to write this in the biocultural factors, acculturation, etc. But I'm not looking at it from that point of view. From acculturation and stress on the ecosystem, because of which the new kind of disease is coming up. That's where sanitation and water-related waterborne diseases. And third major factor is that because the question is on environment and ecology, the far off locations, isolated locations, challenging terrains, because of which the spread of health related facilities seem to be difficult, and hence their location within the forest area itself, there is a forest area, etc., itself throws up a new challenge. Mm throws up a challenge because when the Forest Conservation Act makes it not possible for the land conversion from the forestry purposes to developmental purposes, these developmental purposes also included the health access that we try to create, and it is on those lines. This is one. And coming to biocultural factors, there could be two or three major things. One is the close endogamy, and hence the close endogamy leading to several inherited diseases. Sickle cell is the one that is studied in the regions of Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, and you have in central India now major studies are going on thalassemia. This is one. Secondly, as far as the other cultural aspects and beliefs are concerned, food taboos. I mean, in the paper one also we spoke about this, that is nutritional kind of conditions, nutritional anthropology related food taboos, etc. And this apart, when we talk about cultural aspects and health conditions, based on what kind of economic subsistence they are in, whether they are into shifting cultivation or nomadic living. There are several artisan tribes which are nomadic. So they have their health concerns, like how administratively also there are problems of migrating populations or the ones who are constantly in transhumance, etc. Their identity cards become an issue, their health and other services become a challenge. So it is not simply their own cultural elements, but their lifestyle, their non-sedentary lifestyle also makes a big challenge for taking the help of. So in the answers that I was trying to talk to several students, this administrative problem is not incorporated in several of the answers, except one or two people. Yeah, that is the one. And not to forget your problems of alcoholism, substance use, kind of. You can close your answers by bringing together how biomedical care can be brought together with bringing adaptation capabilities and extension of healthcare services with a bit of compromise on the strict rules that are being followed on the maintenance of the stocks, etc. So I think that is where Kaka panel recommendations can come handy. Mm. I did not see anybody using Kaka I mean, those of you who are speaking to me, slightly disturbing लगा, but ठीक है. I mean, there is this other question. The significant contributions of B.S. Guha, Iravati Karve, and S.R.K. Chopra to Indian archaeology. ये इंडियन एंथ्रोपोलॉजी थोड़ा सा बच्चों को टीच करने का तरीका भी है. मोर देन टू थिंकर्स बीइंग गिवन. I really loved it because that throws a new challenge at the student. But जैसा भी हो, you'll have to bring in the commonalities, like how commonalities or differences. जैसा कि गुहा working in physical anthropology, Iravati Karve social anthropology, SRK Chopra prehistoric archaeology. So if you are giving this in your first paragraph itself, the niche areas or the specializations they work in, that communicates to the examiner that yes, you are aware of their distinctive fields. So when it comes to B.S. Guha, you have his standard racial classification, so there's nothing to worry about. But then there are other things like his association with the census, so census and anthropology, kind of a combination. He was the one who was using anthropometry, growth studies, serological studies being reported. So that's where Guha brings biological anthropology close to public policy and developmental initiatives. ये एक हो गया निरावती कार्य. So basically what we are trying to say here is that ये तीन different thinkers को इकट्ठा एक ही question में आपसे पूछा गया. So you are to write distinctively about each of them. If at all they were having a commonality, जैसा कि in the previous questions resilient सरकार वाला जो question था वहाँ पर, because there's a lot of commonality and within that commonality you are trying to compare. यहाँ पर commonality बहुत कम है. They are from distinctive subfields of anthropology. So you have informed that in the first paragraph itself, and then you are trying to write about these three thinkers individually. जैसा कार्वे के studies हो गए, kinship and religion, Mahabharata and all that stuff. And Professor Chopra's combination of prehistoric archaeology and physical anthropology. That's where how he was actively involved with Archaeological Survey of India, Harappan studies, and bringing in the modern knowledge of prehistory, ethnoarchaeology, kind of things. So, yeah, and that's where from year to year conventional जो thinkers हैं उनको तो पढ़ना ही है. Apart from the conventional thinkers, which other thinkers or researchers have to be incorporated, that one has to meticulously plan. ठीक है. चलिए, let us go to the other question. It reads as, what are the different types of caste mobility in India? Highlight various factors responsible. So, very conventional kind of a question, different. Oh, sorry. Different types of caste mobility and various factors. So there may be vertical mobility, horizontal mobility. There can be mechanisms, Sanskritization, westernization, migration, census, religious conversions. So that is where various other things like Islamization, Christianization, etc. And perhaps when we are talking about caste mobility, as a part of these, you may incorporate mobility through education, mobility through constitutional provisions and reservations. So basically, here we are trying to provide uh, something like affirmative action, trying to provide special opportunities for them. So they seem to be, so these are all mechanisms of upward mobility, but I also want you to incorporate downward mobility. Downward mobility, like how we speak about Dalit model or Shudra model, SC model, etc., of or tribal model of Sanskritization. That's also one way of. So basically, the entire lot of discussion. Brahmo Samaj and Arya Samaj, they seem to be uh, the ideological ones, yeah, may not be to get rid of caste, etc., but as a mechanism to assert their anti-caste ideology. Charan is saying in our country, religion had adopted castes. Religion had adopted castes. Can we say it had an impact on caste mobility except in case of detribalization? You can incorporate, you know, things like neo-Buddhist movement or Christianization, in spite of the fact that there was a migration from one religion to the other. Caste identity did not change. So I think you wanted to mention in that particular fashion, है ना? Upward mobility, downward mobility तो एक हो गया. Third thing is this, yeah, you can. That's the third aspect basically. You can say that Arya Samaj, once you join, you're changing your name, kind of. Yes, perception change. वहीं पर हम कह रहे थे census kind of documentations. We see that you are trying to give yourself a new kind of identity, asserting new identity. ठीक है. Thank you for writing. Thank you for making the discussion more interactive, है ना? तो ऐसा है, migration, urbanization, all that stuff, globalization, various kind of industries, occupations, changing the perception of people towards the caste. This paper is like लुत्फ लेते हुए लिखो and you enjoy in writing. That's where it is. People always question how can we enjoy the exam and kind of जब तक आप enjoy नहीं करोगे तो I don't think the required result would come. Elucidate the role of demographic and social factors for population growth in India. बहुत दिनों से इस तरह का question no was not asked. Basically because हम तो देखते ही रह गए. Census did not come. I think UPSC was also tirelessly waiting. तो finally पूछ ही लिया, है ना? So the question is role of demographic and social factors in the population growth. Basically, population growth across the country, across various segments is not constant. We have had different processes, different demographic processes that have been more active or less active in different places. So whether it is fertility, fecundity, natality, all these aspects, they seem to be varying. So basically, when we are talking about the role of demographic and other factors, you'll have to talk on these elements, how exactly age structure, mortality, etc. These, the fundamental demographic aspects, they get influenced by several cultural elements. You should. Those are the kind of because ये question तो statistics के basis पर है. Without statistics, you will not be able to. But then you can incorporate various things, just economic status, change in the economic status or educational status. You may also talk about the changing marriage system, delayed marriages, etc. They seem to have had a lot of impact on demography. But yeah, इतना ज़्यादा impact तो नहीं लगा when you're comparing with countries like China. But yeah, ये question, I see this question being asked in the context of either the delimitation or in the context of spreading of the developmental expenditure to the places where there is huge population. The growth of the states that have been performing well in the family planning and population control mechanisms. I think it is in that particular context the question actually comes in. ठीक है. Total fertility rate, even if it has reduced, we'll have to see how um, how less it is when compared to replacement level fertility. है ना? So ये question था जो fact based है आपका. Critically examine the concept of scheduled tribe and mention the limitations in the administrator's criteria. Limitations of administrators criteria. Scheduled tribe wala concept though, I mean the major problem that we are having is the definition of the tribe, concept of tribe, which largely seems to be a challenge not only for the Indian constitution but also for the entire discipline of anthropology for that matter. But yeah, we have been depending on scheduled tribes. ट्राइब का जो डेफिनेशन क्राइटेरिया बेस्ड में था, जैसा यू मे टॉक अबाउट घूरियस क्राइटेरिया, यू मे ब्रिंग दैट इनटू पिक्चर. दैट्स वेरी मच ट्रू आशीष. 2.1 एंड 1.9 वाला जो आप बता रहे हो. So here what we see is the growth rate seem to have slowed down, but not too much of slowing down. है ना? So growth rate has come down. It's not that there is a negative growth or there's a massive difference in the growth rate. So that is the reason why we could actually surpass their population, the Chinese population. है ना? So not a really encouraging lower level, I guess. Yes. Yeah, we were talking about scheduled tribes, and the question says the administrator's criteria, limitation to the administrator's criteria. Now, यहाँ पर क्या है? Your answer has to talk about the different variations that we find in the nature of scheduled tribes, the problems and the nature of scheduled tribes, the requirements of them. The tribes seem to be at different levels of development. There may be certain tribes that are more elitistic even when compared to the mainstream society, but there could be where you have PVTGs, where you have DNTs, etc. So the major limitation is whether we are able to plan for the particular communities, particular tribal communities. So जहाँ पर आपको efforts हैं या फिर policies are there, like PVTG related policies, you may perhaps talk about them. But in general, there is this understanding that lack of a special initiative, special cadre for tribal welfare, and the orientation of administrator, anti-orientation, anti-tribal orientation of the administrator, that seems to be doing not so good in theirs. So इस तरह से whether the inclusion of tribals into the mainstream decision making is happening or not, kind of. So the so-called cultural isolation you're trying to maintain, and developmental isolation also, trying to put them at a bay. Yes, yes, that is true. जिस तरह से N.K. Bose वाला entire literature on tribal awareness of rights and administrative approach, what are the challenges of administrative approach. So N.K. Bose writings become more convenient for this particular question. And though the examiner is not actually pinpointedly asking, this answer calls for having an effort from you. Take an opinion, take a stand about what has to be the administrator's approach. जैसे लोकल कमीशन के recommendations हो गए, bottom up kind of a planning, SC Dubey's social audit, cultural audit kind of things, cultural impact assessment. So I think those can help. In section B, we have again a very common kind of this is an arguable thing, ma topmost position, whether it should be given to the tribal people. I mean, people have suggested, and even in the case of the women welfare, etc., this kind of suggestions were given. But I think a proper training, awareness, the empathetic orientation, non-ethnocentric way of doing things can also do good. Now, coming to the other question, impact of urbanization, industrialization. So this has a huge history, basically, though it's on this whole lot of books were written, it is asked for 10 marks. Impact of urbanization and industrialization in tribal community. So you can perhaps in the first paragraph, you try to give at least 4 or 5, 6 different names of the anthropologists who worked on this, whether that is Roy, D.N. Majumdar, Surjit Sinha kind of people, and L.P. Vidyarthi, who were trying to study from the earliest times of modern industrialization and urbanization. And that's where from you have this breaking of where are you trying to ask? Involving perspectives from Guha and Ghurye. Was that the previous question you are trying to talk about? Scheduled tribe? Ghurye, I said you can incorporate. In the case of Guha, if you're talking about the Hindus, backward Hindus, not much, I guess. Peripheral markets, youth dormitories, kahan par? In which question are you asking about peripheral markets and youth dormitories? Urbanization, industrialization. Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. So basically, the thinkers and then what all regions were largely studied by them in terms of urbanization, industrialization. एक map वगैरह तो बनता ही है, and the listing of different regions where massive industrialization and urbanization had led to different kinds of impacts. And so when we're talking about different kinds of impacts, cultural impact could be one. That is where you write about the disappearance of youth dormitories. Economic impact could be there, where reciprocity-based peripheral markets seem to have been replaced by more commercialization, etc. So basically, here you may touch upon impact in terms of mobility, migration, impact due to transport, and etc. Somebody is writing industrial nomadism, displacement, displacement, resettlement, and rehabilitation. So, internally displaced populations emerging from industrialization and urbanization. Of course, you have the other issues like loss of economic subsistences, the whole lot of environmental issues, the whole lot of health concerns because of industrialization and urbanization, water contamination, and all that stuff. Not only this, you also can incorporate acculturation and the cultural loss, acculturation, cultural loss, traditional knowledge, traditional healing methods, etc., seem to be largely disappearing. So basically, that is where prominent thinkers have to be incorporated. That could be Vidyarthi, Roy, and Bose kind of people, Surjit Sinha. They may look to be run-of-the-mill kind of names, but they are highly apt for the question. If you are writing, yes, you know. If you're not writing, there's a negative tone there. And then this is very interesting and beautiful that the trend of not dividing the content into paper 1 and paper 2, that looks good. You have the second question, 5B. Taxonomic status of Ramapithecus in the context of Ramapithecus-Sivapithecus controversy. So basically, here the question is about whether those two species to be considered as two different species within the genus, or they are the same species with gender differences. So how exactly the controversy is resolved, and now what is the current status? So this is what is the entire description all about. So in a conversational style, one can talk about this. And then, so the necessary phylogenetic pictures you are supposed to give initially. Ramapithecus and Sivapithecus are considered to be two different entities altogether, but later, based on various arguments, you can. Tribalism and pseudo-tribalism. In fact, I was expecting this question of neo-tribalism this year. If one, those of you who are writing next year can prepare on neo-tribalism. That is a contemporary concept. So tribalism is basically asserting the tribal identity, etc. Pseudo-tribalism is the non-tribal communities trying to assert. So here what is required is the need of tribalism and need of pseudo-tribalism. Need of tribalism because of the exploitation, to fight the exploitation, etc., and also to fight for their own regions and then their own governing mechanisms, whether that could be the Greater Nagalim or the Mizo movement, Mizo nationalism kind of, or even for that matter, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc. These are all within each region. You have the tribal identity, and in order to assert the tribal identity, they have come up with various mechanisms, and that's where tribalism comes in. On the other hand, you have pseudo-tribalism that is actually cornering the benefit of the scheduled tribes, whether in terms of reservations or in terms of the Forest Rights Act, which speaks about proving the residence in the tribal areas for a particular time whatsoever. So ऐसा है, you can give the examples of which are the ones that are largely working in tribalism, and pseudo-tribalism where the ones that are not tribes but they are trying to, the mainstream populations, they are trying to claim the status of the tribes, whether the tribes may be Gujars or Kurmis, etc. So this is one of the elitistic ways of exploiting the tribals. ऐसा है. Simple other question, Varnashram and its contemporary relevance. So the two aspects, Varna and Ashram put together. You may perhaps talk about these as the traditional moral code that is put forth by the Sanatana Dharma, but how in the contemporary times Varna in terms of occupation is becoming more important than caste based on purity and pollution. And when it comes to ashram system, in the traditional society, ashrams seem to be having a role to play, but in the modern times. So it's two different entities you are trying to talk about, Varna system and ashram system. You may perhaps give the argument separately based on different thinkers to what extent it is necessary. For example, in the case of ashrams, you see that Grihastha seems to be the most important one. Mm. And so the first two ashrams, Brahmacharya and Grihastha, but not in the traditional sense. Learning and a homemaker kind of, these two seems to be an important phases, but Vanaprastha and Sannyasa seem to be not really significant ones. Nevertheless, this is a new kind of a social order, new kind of moral code that is coming into picture because of the contemporary times. You can perhaps connect with R.C. Brown's status and role. And Lothal, I had been asking the students to prepare thoroughly on this. So who were the ones that have discovered, when the discovery had happened, what exactly we found, how did we confirm that it was a dockyard? So whether we found any shipwrecks, any other kind of material that you do not find in that particular region, like lapis lazuli or silver, copper kind of things. And based on the kind of evidences that are found at Lothal, what is the conclusion archaeologists are making based on with which regions Lothal had a connect? There also we can have a map to show the regions with which they had a connect. So it is from that perspective, Lothal definitely had a role to play, a bigger role to play in the civilization, in the Harappan civilization altogether. So your answer can actually conclude based on in what sense Lothal had contributed significantly for the dissipation of culture and then trade relations and a sustained civilization that could emerge for a long time. नेक्स्ट ईयर के लिए प्रिपेयर करो डिसअपियरेंस ऑफ IBC, factors responsible for decline of IBC. So anthropological explanations related to disappearance of the civilization. ये थोड़ा लंबा चला. Village was not merely a place where people lived. It had a design in which were reflected the basic values of Indian civilization. So basically, it's something like village as a microcosm of Indian civilization. That's how the question is. It's not simply a place where you live, but it is a place where there are the basic values of Indian civilization. So village as a microcosm of Indian civilization. That around this particular theme, you should be generating your answer. So it is from that point of view, what is it is not simply a place to live, but there is a specific kind of a structure that is associated with Indian village. So a structure, what is the value system, and then how exactly the civilizational dimensions can be reflected um, in the civilization in the village. So basically, you may talk about great and little tradition, kind of. To what extent village reflects a little tradition, to what extent it's a great tradition. So, I mean, when we are trying to apply this GT and LT argument to the explanation of Indian village, it looks very dramatic. It is unlike the Mexico thing. We see the combination of great and little tradition coming up here. So you have the lettered tradition, you have the unlettered tradition, both of them coexisting in Indian village. So we see that both little and great traditions are coexisting in the village. That actually is a challenge at the basic definition of the great tradition itself. Mm. Then uh, yeah, so ऐसा है. Again, these are there's one question. Not necessary, beta. You need not know. See, if at all you know who quoted, it's very much fine. But as long as you understand the context for giving the explanation, I think that is pretty much okay. That is pretty much okay. Okay. Now let me look at the other question. The role of NGOs. ये वाला NGOs का जो question है, this has to be prepared from various contexts. Here in this question, he is talking about role of NGOs in the socio-economic political development of weaker sections and the manner in which they facilitate. So this is an omnibus question. In terms of weaker sections, etc., when you are trying to answer here, it is for the tribes, for the Dalits, for the caste groups. So whoever it is who can be considered as the weaker section, that can be women, that can be rural poor, urban poor. So that's a huge thing basically. See, in the run of the exam, sometimes what might happen is you are having a very narrow kind of orientation. You may restrict yourself to the tribe alone, but the question is much more wider. And that is where, let us read the question again. Socioeconomic and political development of the weaker sections and the manner in which they facilitate the other stakeholders. So basically, when we are talking about socio-economic role NGOs are playing, based on the target group, you may perhaps divide. So if it is the tribal, if it is the scheduled caste, if it is the women, which are the organizations that have been working, in which area they have been working, and then when we talk about political development, which are the NGOs that are working for the awareness, advocacy related NGOs, and the ones that are encouraging democratic participation kind of. The beauty of these papers is the examiner is giving the structure in the question itself. In fact, you have to appreciate that particular thing. It is unlike any other option subject. Here we see that he is giving us the structure, and you just have to look at the question and put those side heads, and you're going ahead with that. And how exactly NGOs are working as the facilitators of other stakeholders. So you may talk about corporate social responsibility. You may talk about United Nations and various other international bodies along with them when NGOs are working. So it is not a very typical anthropology question. Um, it is a question on socio-economic aspects of not simply the tribes, but in general about. So it is a much wider thing, and for this, in the book, I have incorporated the whole lot of discussion about the NGOs. You can perhaps look into that tribal anthropology book. That would be of a great help to us. Going ahead on the same lines, trace the history and describe the methods of formulating the list of OBCs, both at the center and the state level. Yeah, the typical administrative kind of a question, but yeah, it has to bring in what are the different arguments that are associated with defining OBCs, listing OBCs, which are the committees and commissions involved. So the whole lot of historical, that's what he says, right? History and describe the method, trace the history and describe the method of formulating OBCs. So historically, if you see, you would start with the colonial times, how the upper and backward categories, those are the kind of terminologies that were used in pre-independent acts, whether that is 1919 Act, 1935 Act, etc. And then the post-independent times, how the Constitution was trying to make special provisions initially for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, not for the OBCs. And because of that, it becomes the challenge. Various articles you may bring in, like Article 340, various committees and commissions. Kalelkar Committee was there, Mandal Commission was there, and in between, whatever other commissions were there, and how exactly the implementation had happened at the national level and state level. And yeah, in the state, you can give certain examples, states of Karnataka, Bihar, Tamil Nadu, etc. What are the various methods that are actually used? What are the primary criteria? What are the other criteria? Maybe the literacy rates, maybe the income, maybe the occupation kind of things. So this is a very generic kind of a one. If you are having the general understanding of this with the necessary, information related to the committees, commissions, and their working, I think that can help you. And the other question is contemporary limitations. Identify the contemporary limitations in the process of tribal development. How can anthropological knowledge contribute to this particular process? Contemporary limitations in the process of tribal development. Irrespective of now or then, the major problem that we always had was top-down policy making. So we can look at it this way. Contemporary process of tribal development. So when we are going for massive projects, displacement, rehabilitation, resettlement are still a problem. So you may perhaps talk on those lines. So this was a problem in the estate decades, and even now, development, displacement, and rehabilitation, that forms the major thing. Secondly, the rather implementation gaps. What is being said in the developmental initiatives for the tribals that doesn't seem to be, in toto uh, being realized, whether that is PISA Act, Forest Rights Act of 2006. So in letter, they are there. In spirit, there are so many violations of the act that had happened. And thirdly, you have the top-down approach. This is one. This is a major thing. And perhaps the other kind of challenges that we find is in terms of healthcare, in terms of providing market for their resources, in terms of exploitation of their occupations. You can perhaps bring in copyrights, etc., intellectual property rights, preservation, where exactly they are being overridden. And when we talk about market exploitation, like even the tendu leaves, mahua cultivation, etc., minor forest produce. Uh, so these, and then you have conflicts and security issues also, mm, linking it with left-wing extremism, mm, so militarization of the tribal areas, kind of things. So in all this, what I also want you to incorporate is, though the question directly does not ask about, hmm, as the question directly has asked about, how can anthropological knowledge contribute to this process? This is where your entire understanding of anthropology comes into picture. How exactly ethnographic insights have to be brought in, what kind of participatory development has to be, and then anthropologists as activists, anthropologists as mediators, anthropologists as advocates, kind of things, and how they can be a part and parcel of the developmental process. mm, as social service activists, or maybe perhaps appointed by the government in particular capacities. So they have a role to play because of you are supposed to bring in the strengths of anthropologists, the kind of sensitivity, the kind of role they can play in the conflict resolution, the content and methodology that is akin to on the tribal. So you hailed anthropology in this question. Don't lose the opportunity. You'll have to bring in the massive strengths of anthropology. Do not try to have any kind of second thoughts about it. Yeah. If at all in this particular paper, any major question is there that requires a very high-end content with you, is this, that is, rising ethnic conflicts in India and propose their possible remedial measures. So it is here that you will have to go in with the specifics. The question is, discuss the rising ethical conflicts in India and propose their possible remedial measures. So when we talk about rising conflicts, conflicts can be based on caste, region, religion, because he is not talking about tribe alone. Rising ethnic conflicts. When we say ethnic conflicts, it can be um, communal violence. It can be, you know, the rights movements of the tribes, whether due to the internal strength or association with the externality. There can be regional movements like regional autonomy movements, linguistic and other cultural identity based ones. So in each of the categories, you are supposed to bring in an example and also try to bring in the possible remedial measure. So this is a very dynamic kind of a question where various things that you have studied across the subject has to be brought in. And that is the reason why we always keep asking you to practice your answers. Similar kind of a question if you have tried. If at all you have not tried, then yeah. You can bring in, sir, cultural relativism in that. So remedial measures is something that is very important in this, how anthropologists can work in the peace building, in the dialogue, in, you know, bringing in an understanding of legal and institutional measures. Yes, conceptual strength of anthropology and then administrative strength of anthropology, research orientedness, etc. So these are the kind of questions where वो कहते हैं ना दिल खोल के लिखो, whatever you have felt all across your subject, that should come in your answer. ऐसे दो तीन questions हैं this paper and the first paper where your love for the subject comes very much into open. And then there is this other question. Critically evaluate the concept of nation building and describe its impact on indigenous societies. So basically the argument here is the nation state. Intercaste conflict can be include the solution. You can. Sometimes the solutions may look to be very theoretical. but you can bring in the names of these authors and thinkers. ठीक है? Yeah. So जहाँ तक नेशन स्टेट का सवाल है, that is where you have the whole lot of issues. The underlying theme of nation state is assimilation, bringing them into one big homogeneous entity. And that's where the major challenge comes in. And the nation state is also seen as a continuation of the colonial legacy. And technically, anthropologists criticize this. ये तो conventional हो गया. But in the contemporary times, to what extent anthropologists are siding with or not taking a stand on the nation state? Because when we are trying to talk about nation state and its impact on indigenous communities, to begin with, it is majorly a political compromise, political impact that comes into picture. And because of the political impact, there has been economic impact also. There have been socio-cultural impact as well. And that is where at every place we see the homogeneous cultures emerging, spread of the mainstream culture emerging. And all this would become a very tough exercise because of lack of that legal entity, separate legal entity. And yeah, so all this I mean, if at all in the true anthropological sense, leads to marginalization of indigenous communities, and there is ethnocide that happens in this whole process. Um, but here you'll have to talk about the changing stand of anthropologists, especially in the context of nation state. Now it is a patterns anthropologist, not simply a theoretical empathetic and sympathetic anthropologist. Your empathies and sympathies seem to be changing from the so-called marginalized people to the one, if at all we could call the mainstream or the exploiter or the centralized authority. Yeah, that looks to be a bitter thing, but when you're trying to make a point, it has to be a subtle one. And this question number 8, a lot of people have come back with this because in the economic anthropology and tribal ethnography of the Toda, we try to incorporate this discussion that is Toda, Kota, Kurumba, kind of that picture of reciprocity that you generally study in balanced reciprocity of in economic anthropology. That's where, and then you have good lot of thinkers who worked on. So describe the nature of traditional socio-economic interdependence among these tribes in Nilgiri, highlight the changes that have come. So basically, you can use rivers. Even if you do not remember any other thinkers, you can use rivers and how he had described reciprocity among them. So the the traditional occupation of them traditionally, what kind of socio-economic situation was there and how the interdependency was. So you can draw the picture of the Toda, Kota, Kurumba, etc. and explain it there. The change is very much obvious. Change because of modern economy, change because of influence of mainstream and urban, etc., and the state intervention, everything disturbing the reciprocity and everything being changed into the kind of market exchange. And also you have mechanisms of tourism, globalization. They also did their own magic of disturbing the whole thing, and now an altogether different kind of interdependence or lack of interdependence is what we find in them. So those of you who had actually read the Toda political institutions, the council, the tribal council incorporate not simply the Toda, but from the neighboring tribal communities also. That shows the intertribal relationships being so strong and deep. But yeah, things changed. So in a way, the work of rivers on the Toda gives us an idea about how a tribe can be modernized, how a tribe can work as a model of emulation for the mainstream population, irrespective whether they are low caste or high caste. So this Nilgiri looks to be a very beautiful experimentation in that point of view. So hindsight, if we observe, I think that kind of a description we can give. Yeah. And then you have the other question. This was also pretty much expected for this year. That is minority. So we are supposed to define this based on National Commission for Minorities, um, how exactly they have defined religious minorities and linguistic minorities. So elaborate the pattern of linguistic and religious minorities. When we say pattern, we are talking about the distribution of them in different regions of the country. You can perhaps give a map and explain in which regions what kind of linguistic and religious minorities are there, and what are their problems and issues. This is a pretty much direct kind of a question, a definition, and there. What I can say is you may incorporate certain studies like Clifford Geertz study of ethnic and linguistic identity. Uh, that is a clear requirement of any community for that matter. So minority rights movements, what we speak about in the Indian context. So not much of a description here in terms of the rights movements. Basically here, the basis, for example, based on the percentage, religious minorities, what percentage, Islamic groups, Christianity, Buddhists, etc., and where exactly they are majorly located. So it is thoroughly a fact-based kind of a question. Hardly any opinions can be added there. And the last one, again, a very direct kind of a question, that is PVTGs. You're defining those 75 PVTGs, the four major criteria, whether that is Deber and others. Examine their current status, nomenclature, and distribution. So PTG becoming PVTG. And now here the current status becomes something very tricky, because the four major criteria you're talking about, one of them is about depopulation. So that is where the whole lot of health concerns can come into picture, and also in terms of socioeconomic factors such as literacy. The tribal communities where less than 30% literacy rate is there, those can actually be incorporated here, because among the PVTGs, if you observe, the literacy rates are largely below 30%. And because, I mean, there's a chance in that answer to incorporate PVTG developmental initiatives separately. I insist that you do it, and various other challenges also in the contemporary times, displacement because of mining, the Baiga related discussions that are happening in the news, or the Dongaria Khond of Odisha. You have a whole lot of things, and the modern tourism, ecotourism, assimilation activities of different kinds. So that's where it is. I mean, when we are talking about nomenclature from the primitive tribal groups, the PVTGs, so we are trying to drop the term primitive, and that was a more anthropological discussion that had happened, and because of that, the derogatory term of primitive was removed, in particularly vulnerable tribal group. That's how it is. And when you're speaking about the particular ones, you have given. possibility of designing a developmental initiative, especially for that particular tribal group. So it is in that sense, the change in the nomenclature, change in the approach towards them, and what are the kind of developmental initiatives one is trying to plan for PVTG along with the other scheduled tribes. So with a few examples. I think that's where it is, and that was the beautiful paper. And I'm sure our students would shine high, and I'm looking forward to have good numbers out there. And those of you who have joined, though you did not write the exam this year, I'm happy to have you. And further, anybody would want to have any kind of conversation in general, chit chat, etc., irrespective whether you had been my student, not my student, you're most welcome. Let us sit and talk and enjoy the process of preparing for the exam. Have a great time. Good day. Thank you so much. Thank you, team, for your support.